Which rookies lost the most value during the NFL draft? We will break it down next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox, no console needed. Head over to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Magdziuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. And on today's show, we're taking a look at some rookies that lost value over draft weekend. And Kate, of course, we have to start with Shedeur Sanders, who was going in the first round of Superflex rookie mocks basically all offseason. And we talked about this, I remember, with our last show with Matt. I was concerned that the draft capital wouldn't be high enough to keep him in the first round. And it was way worse than I expected. Not only does he not go in the first round, he doesn't go in the first 4 rounds. Where do you see Shedeur landing in rookie drafts now?
I mean, when you pair the lack of draft capital paired with the landing spot and the mess that the Browns currently have at quarterback right now with their roster, then you pair the fact that, like, he didn't have a ton of, I would say, overall upside to begin with, just because of the fact that he does profile as a pure pocket passer. That puts us pretty darn down deep in the dumps here, Marcus. I think you have to look at him as more of a, I don't know, a 3rd, 4th round pick. And that's even in super flex drafts for me. I don't want much to do with the situation at all.
So I actually wrote an article over on the 33rd Team today. I did a 5-round super flex mock draft, and I had Shedeur Sanders going in the 4th round because it's not only did he fall to the 5th round of the NFL draft, but the Browns also took a quarterback, obviously ahead of him, in Dylan Gabriel. There's just not going to be very many opportunities. And with a 5th round pick, if Shedeur's like not performing well in practice, or the attitude's a problem, or he's a distraction, they're just going to cut him and move on. And we saw during the NFL draft, there's just not a lot of interest in Shedeur, not only as a starter, but just as a quarterback in general. So I remember us talking about with Matt on Wednesday about if you're a top 3, top 5 pick, you just get chance after chance after chance to start in the NFL. That's not the case for a 5th round pick. You might get one opportunity, and if it doesn't go well, you're gone. You're out of the league. There's probably someone in your league that's going to want to gamble on Shedeur Sanders in the 3rd round of their Superflex drafts. It shouldn't be you.
Yeah, the question for me always just comes back to the upside factor. What is your evaluation of Shedeur Sanders, the player? Of course, take that into account. So for me, it's really easy to bump him into the 3rd or 4th round of my rookie drafts, because I already had the perception that from a fantasy perspective, I didn't think there was a ton of upside there. Again, like, you look at the lack of rushing upside that he showed at the collegiate level. And it's not necessarily to say that he's not athletic enough. That's just not his play style. That's not how he creates. He creates with his arm, his accuracy. That is how Shedeur Sanders wins football games. He does not win them with his legs. So when that has become such a common thread of high upside quarterbacks for fantasy football, it gets really easy to bump him down significantly in the ranks. And then you add in all the other factors, and again, it just makes it all the easier to bump him down. Now, the question really becomes, like, are you going to have a FOMO kind of situation? Are you going to have a fear of missing out? Like, is there a chance that maybe no?
Because, okay, this is what we talked about pre-draft. Like, if Shedeur Sanders works out in the NFL, what's the most likely scenario? And we were talking about, like, maybe like in the Geno Smith range of quarterbacks. So that's a good player, but that's not a top 15, top 12 player. So what are you really missing out on? There's just not a lot of upside here. And if you're taking a quarterback that late, I would rather shoot for somebody that has more upside. Now, who is that? I'm not quite sure. I did want to ask you about another quarterback who I've seen fall in some of the mock drafts, and that's Jalen Milroe. There was some talk that maybe he could be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. He was invited to Green Bay to attend the draft. Not only does he not go in the first round, he doesn't go in the second round either. Falls to the third round to the Seahawks. It's actually a good landing spot because there's not an established starter ahead of him. But when you get drafted that low, I think we have to knock his value overall just a little bit.
Just a little bit. And I definitely understand that. Now, I think circumstantially, when we're looking at Jalen Milroe and his landing spot, things feel neutral for me. Just because of the fact that I think situationally, it's not a bad spot for him to be in terms of getting room to develop, right?
No.
Like that's our concern with Jalen Milroe is, let's say he was drafted much higher, right? And maybe he was drafted in the first round. Like there was some speculation could possibly happen. If that happened, that puts the pressure on a lot more quickly to develop him as a passer, to get him into the reign as a starter much quicker. And that probably, I would say, based on my evaluation of Milroe coming out, would be detrimental because, again, not drafted highly enough to get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to some of these inadequacies. There is a little bit of a sweet spot for some of these developmental quarterbacks where if you're drafted later and you have a team that is invested in developing you, then that's great because you have the time. Time is not as aggressively pursuing your either success or demise. So that is the part that I'm looking at Jalen Milroe and I'm saying, okay, that part's a winner. But yeah, the fact that he wasn't regarded as one of these top quarterbacks in the class. You had Tyler Shuck, again, injury history, age, like he had all these factors for him and he went in the second round. So to see Jalen Milroe fall, I can understand the loss of value, but man, Marcus, the upside is so much more tremendous.
Can I ask you about one more quarterback really quickly? Jackson Dart goes to the Giants. Now, he does get the first-round draft capital. Do you think his value goes up or down now that we're in the post-draft era?
I'm going to say up for me. And I understand there's kind of a tricky spot there, I think, to look at Jackson Dart and feel overly confident. I don't really think this is a spot where you can feel overly confident at him in this juncture. But what I do think you might be able to feel comfortable about is the fact that, like, man, in terms of weaponry, he's got a top tier wide receiver, which you're going to love. A wide receiver that I think has a high enough ceiling that he will elevate the play of his quarterback. Plus, again, you have the fact that the team traded back into the first round. I think that's a really plus sign because that tells me they're wanting that fifth year option.
Sure.
If things work out, that could be a huge plus. And then you just look at the upside in terms of his mobility, his athleticism. That's the kind of thing I want to take a shot on as a fantasy manager, and not necessarily the pure pocket passer who maybe will start someday. Who knows? I think that's
there is some upside there, at least a little bit, because of the running ability. The offense, there are some weapons. I mean, Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton, like Tyrone Tracy, Cam Scatteraboo, like there are some weapons for him to work with. It's just, do you trust the front office? Do you trust the organization to develop him? Here's my bold prediction is that none of those guys are even going to be there in year 2 to see his development. So that's what makes it a little trickier for me.
I think that's very fair. How long is the leash for the Giants coaching staff, etc.? Who knows at this point? But again, the fact that you do have that first round draft capital. You have the mobility. I think all of those are things that I'm going to put in the plus column. Plus, you pair him with a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. Hard to argue with that.
All right, let's talk about some receivers that lost value over the weekend, including a pair of teammates. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment or coffee? It's easy to lose track, but that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, all of your investments, all of your spending in one place, so you can stop managing your money and start building your wealth. I've been using Monarch Money for a couple months now, and I realized how much money I was wasting on coffee. I can make coffee at my house. I don't need to make it, I don't need to go on these coffee runs all the time. But now I'm budgeting smarter and I'm saving more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are discussing some of the biggest losers from the NFL draft. Kate, let's talk about some receivers. And we got to start with the Iowa State guys, Jayden Higgins, Jalen Milroe. I really like Milroe coming into this class. Not so much on Higgins, but the fact that they landed together in Houston behind Nico Collins with Christian Kirk, with Tank Dell, who will likely be back in 2026. Just not a great landing spot.
Not a great one. And you know what? Like, you got to give, Jayden Higgins credit. He did get that second round draft capital early in the second round. In fact, 6'4", 214 pounds, like has a decent amount of upside. And funnily enough, like some of his comps came from, he had some comps to Nico Collins specifically. Yeah. Like there were, I think I was generally kind of surprised that he went as early as he did. But yeah, that room suddenly looks super crowded. And
we should also mention John Mechie's there, Xavier Hutchinson. Like, these aren't guys that you're worried about, but they have guys that have like somewhat decent draft capital just as backups.
Yeah, and I think what you're looking at is suddenly a pretty crowded room with a pocket passer who now has plenty of targets all over the field. You also have, the idea of, we'll see how the tight end position works out in Houston, but like you also have the tight ends in that room. You have Dalton Schultz. You have last year's, I think a fourth round pick, and Cade Stover. I believe they either third or fourth round. Like, yep. You've got a lot of options. There are a lot of mouths to feed. So that's a really big plus for a guy like CJ Stroud, who, again, like all of his upside comes from his ability as a passer because of, the fact that he's not necessarily a pure runner. But I don't know how they're going to funnel those targets beyond what we're going to see from Nico Collins, who I think is obviously going to get the lion's share.
It's just a little bit of a bummer because if Jayden Higgins was the pick, early second round like he was, and they don't draft another receiver, I think you and I are coming on the show today talking about how big of a winner Jayden Higgins is. Like, he's got a path to being the number 2 receiver, and he still does. But we really like Jalen Milroe, and I think Jalen Milroe's the same way. If they wouldn't have drafted Jayden Higgins and Milroe was going to be the new Tank Dell, we would be really excited about that. But now both players, their upside is just so limited in this offense because whenever Nico Collins is healthy, he's such a target hog. I think in a shallower wide receiver class, I think we were hoping that both of these players had a chance to be their respective team's number 2 receiver right away. And now that's not the case.
I do kind of wonder if Noel doesn't maybe, emerge as kind of the bigger winner in this equation, because I do think he will probably slot in more as that sort of Tank Dell role.
Yeah, he just has the differing skill set from everybody else.
And then you kind of look at Higgins and you look at Nico Collins, some of these big bodied guys. Like, I do think that at this point now, Noel, I'm going to, have over Higgins despite the draft capital, just because I think his role in the offense will be a little bit more unique than maybe what we're going to see with Jayden Higgins, who I think his presence could be literally big on this offense.
Yeah.
But again, I think the skill set I'm going to see is maybe more duplicative of what we see from Nico Collins as opposed to Noel, who I think is going to offer something a little different for CJ Stroud over the middle.
Another receiver that, and honestly, I don't know if there's any player outside of Shedeur who
Mm.
lost more value this weekend, and it's Emeka Egbuka, the wide receiver from Houston, or from Ohio State, excuse me. It's funny because I don't think anybody was expecting Egbuka to be a top 20 pick, but he was actually the second receiver drafted in this class, if you don't count Travis Hunter. He goes at 19 to Tampa Bay. So top 20 draft capital, great. That's awesome. But he goes to a team that has Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, who is primarily a slot receiver, who just signed a new 3-year deal in free agency this offseason. They have Jalen McMillan, who was a third-round pick last year and was very productive as a rookie. And oh, by the way, Cade Otton, who was a pretty decent NFL tight end. I think in time, Egbuka is eventually going to be the number 2 receiver in this offense. But you're gonna have to wait a while. Like, there's a chance that he just gets 60 to 70 targets this year, and that's it.
I think that's absolutely fair. And I do kind of wonder, and this is funny because, again, coming out of the same Ohio State offense, and I think they're similar kind of possession type receivers with a pretty high floor, maybe not as high of a ceiling as you would like, but from like a volume perspective, from a role perspective that you could, I think him and Jackson Smith and Jigba, former teammates here, could see a similar kind of trajectory. Remember, Jackson Smith and Jigba got that first round draft capital, was drafted pretty early in the process, despite kind of profiling as more of
pick
the
20.
slot receiver. Yeah, I think right around pick 20. Very similar situations, honestly, where, I think there was a question mark of like, how early do you pick a guy that maybe projects as a pure slot receiver? Like a bigger slot receiver, he's not, undersized by any means, but like
No.
how early do you take a player like that? And we saw with Jackson Smith and Jigba, he came off the board early, didn't blow anybody out of the water in year 1, but came back with a vengeance in year 2, took full opportunities of every rep that he got on the field. And suddenly we're looking at him as a top 15 dynasty receiver. But I could picture that first year being a big year of transition. You have Chris Godwin there who, I think we're kind of projecting Emeka Egbuka to play a Chris Godwin type of role, but Chris Godwin's still there. So that's the kind of big question for me. You have, again, he's almost 29. He's 29 years old right now. Like, he's still got time left on his new contract. Like, there's a lot of questions, I think, with Chris Godwin, but overall, I could still picture like long term there being some value with Emeka. You just got to be really, really patient with it, unfortunately.
Really patient. And the thing is, it's like, how long could that potentially be? Because again, Godwin just signed a new deal. So like, I don't think Tampa Bay can get out of it at all over the next 2 years. Jalen McMillan is going into year 2 of his rookie contract. So he's obviously going to be part of the equation. So you look at it like that, we're talking about like 3 years from now at the very minimum. But we're talking, again, this Emeka Egbuka was somebody that we thought could potentially be a first-round pick in our rookie drafts. I don't see any way that you can justify drafting him that high when there's players like Trey Harris, who I don't even love. Like, I don't love Trey Harris, a prospect, but he just has a much clearer path to playing time with a really good quarterback than Emeka Egbuka does.
Yeah, I think that's very fair, even though I like Egbuka so much better as a player. And I think his long-term floor is so much higher. It is, I understand being intrigued in the more immediate path to a target share, but I will also say, like, if you're in a full rebuild, right, and you're trying to accumulate some picks in the back half of your first round, I think Emeka is a great long-term target that, yeah, it's not going to feel like a sexy pick right now. It's not a pick that if I'm in contention, I'd be excited to make, but he's a player that I believe in the skill set that long term he will be a solid wide receiver 2 in your dynasty leagues for several years to come once it happens.
Let's talk about some running backs that lost value over the weekend. We knew that was going to happen because this running back class was so good, but a couple of these guys fell into some really rough situations. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in free bonus bets if your $5 bet wins. It's that simple. I love FanDuel. I love how easy FanDuel makes betting, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you could even combine live props into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. We can't always be there when the game starts, but you get to the second quarter, make your same-game parlay. It's absolutely fantastic. It makes every minute of the NBA game so much fun. Don't miss out. Head over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. The NFL draft is over, but roster moves and news never stops. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Kay, let's talk about some day 3 running backs. We knew this class was loaded, but we were hoping some of these players would land in some favorable landing spots. I just want to go over a couple of the running backs that were selected on day 3. Bhayshul Tuten, the speedy running back from Virginia Tech, lands in Jacksonville behind Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. You've got Cam Skadaboo, which is not an awful landing spot, but he will be competing with Tyrone Tracy for snaps. Trevor Etienne goes to Carolina. He's going to be playing behind Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle and Jonathan Brooks, maybe down the line a little bit. You've got Jarquez Hunter, who went in round 4 with the Rams, who have Kyren Williams and Blake Corum. Dylan Sampson, who we thought maybe could go in the 3rd round. He lands with the Browns, who drafted Quinshon Judkins in the 2nd round. Which running back here do you think lost the most value on day 3?
I think you got to go with Bhayshul Tuten, who just at this point in time is fighting for the most snaps, right? Like Cam Skadaboo, I understand he's fighting with Tyrone Tracy, but again, I already look at Cam Skadaboo as the better 3-down option in that offense over Tyrone Tracy. I know Tyrone Tracy, good receiver, but I think Cam Skadaboo is just the better threat on an every down basis. I again, I'm not comparing like their athleticism, etc., but the pathway to snaps for Cam Skadaboo, I think, is a little bit more clear than what we're getting out of Bhayshul Tuten, because I kind of thought we might see Trevor Lawrence here on the, or Travis Etienne. Holy moly. I really thought we might see him on the move here, whether that be maybe in exchange for a day 3 pick for a team who would consider, offering him a long-term extension. Didn't happen. Didn't move on. And maybe that was just like, they didn't get the right offer at the time. Maybe once we're into training camp and if we have some injuries, we might see that market shift. But for now, you had this guy who, had a lot of upside as kind of like this speedy kind of option, but he's undersized. How is he going to take over this backfield? I don't know.
I don't know either. It's tough because I thought there was a chance Tuten could have potentially went in the 3rd round. I know that the Dallas Cowboys were looking at Tuten at pick 76 or 77, and that would have been an ideal landing spot. So this one's really, really rough. I think Skadaboo, I think we kind of always thought he was going to be part of a committee. And honestly, if you're going to split snaps with Tyrone Tracy, it's not the worst thing in the world, considering Tracy's 26 and has kind of struggled to stay healthy. So that one doesn't bother me that much. I will say one that shocked me a little bit was DJ Giddens, who I thought
Yes.
could potentially be, a third round pick. He falls all the way to the 5th round. Now he does land in an interesting spot. He's now the clear-cut backup to Jonathan Taylor with the Indianapolis Colts. But as a standalone player right now, like he's just not going to get on the field at all unless there's an injury.
No, and I'm really bummed because DJ Giddens, one of my favorite sleepers in this class. I thought he was
You
in
called him
terms of
DJ
his,
Middens one time though. I remember that.
yeah, like I
By
think
autocorrect.
yeah, I think there was a lot of upside for him as like a pure runner. Like I would say in terms of his pure rushing ability, I would have graded him as the RB3 in this class, only behind Genty and Hampton. Like I love his rushing style. He has that explosive element to the game while also kind of being patient, being able to make the right cuts. Doesn't offer a ton in terms of his abilities on third down, but I think the potential's there. So when you pair him with a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who is so far and away the clear-cut RB1, where are you going to find time to take Jonathan Taylor off the field to get DJ oh my god,
DJ
DJ
Giddens.
Giddens these snaps on first and second down? You're not.
No. I got one more loser, and it's Damian Martinez, who I kind of always thought was a day 3 pick, but I thought he had a chance to be like a 4th round pick and be part of a committee. Not only does he land in a crowded backfield with Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker, Kate, he falls all the way to the 7th round, pick 223. At that spot in the draft, like you're just hoping to make the team. And honestly, most 7th round picks don't. I think Damian Martinez, who was kind of routinely going in the late 2nd, early 3rd and rookie drafts, is someone that just is completely off our radar now until further notice.
Yeah, the draft capital paired with the landing spot that was already kind of a competitive spot in terms of touches, not outstanding. Another guy, Ollie Gordon, went top of the 6th round to the Miami Dolphins, was a guy who fell tremendously in this draft process. We had mentioned the possibility that like we might not even see him drafted in this class, despite some pretty strong buzz ahead of the 2024 season. Didn't pan out, but now he goes to Miami again. Just another crowded backfield. You have Jalen Wright, who the team invested, a future 3rd just last year. You have, Devin Achane. Like you have a crowded group of playmakers. And for a guy who, I think kind of can profile as more of a workhorse running back, no pathway to touches there.
Yeah, I mean, no, we knew that a lot of this was going to happen because there's just so many running backs. And one of the things that we actually saw play out in the draft, Kate, was just that teams kept pushing off their need to draft running backs because they knew how many good ones were going to be available on day 3. In the 3rd round, the only running backs that we had drafted were Caleb Johnson, and that's it. Caleb Johnson was our only 3rd round running back, which is pretty incredible. I think we had 2 go in the 2nd round with Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson. Teams were just not reaching. Oh, excuse me, 3. We did RJ Harvey go in that range as well. Teams are just not reaching on running backs. And now it's going to be a little bit harder to decipher the draft capital here because I think a 4th rounder this year is usually the equivalent to a 3rd rounder in previous years. So I'm not so thrown off by the 4th round draft capital, but it's the guys that are in the 5th, 6th, 7th round. I'm not sure what to do with.
Yeah. And we had a lot of running backs go in this class. So again, like these, we can use these landing spots as tier breaks, which I think is fair. But again, there are no clear winners in the late rounds of these drafts here. I don't know. I think we have to make our peace with that.
All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. On tomorrow's show, Matt Williamson will be here. We'll continue to talk about the NFL draft and all of the news coming out of the draft. So make sure you tune in for that. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.